Fortune favors the bold. No timid, shrinking violet ever made $1 million. It takes bold thinking and bold action to rise to the top of the ladder of success. One of the priceless ingredients of our $1 million secret is boldness of concept and boldness of action. Perhaps in your own life, you reached some decisive moment when you had to take a bold and decisive step in the direction of your destiny, where fortune, fame, and riches awaited you. Perhaps you hesitated, fearful of taking the step from which there was no return, and you lost the biggest opportunity of your entire life. A weak, timid, indecisive approach to life breeds inertia, failure, and misery. You may fail to act because you do not have confidence in yourself, or simply, as is true in so many cases, because you feel that everything has been discovered, invented, and achieved in this age of miracles. Back in 1880, a man who worked for the U.S. Patent Office wrote a letter, resigning from his job because, he said, "Everything has been invented that could possibly be conceived of by man, and I see no future to my job." Just stop and think what amazing inventions have come since that time. The future is as full of opportunities for those who have bold concepts and take bold steps to achieve their destiny, as it was in the distant past. We are only now breaking through barriers that will lead man to some of the greatest achievements the world has ever known. Take a bold step now. The arena for action is in your own mind. Here it is that you must take a bold step now for achieving victory in the future. In your thinking, you must conceive the world you want to live in, the situations you want to master, the greatness you wish to achieve. To give you greater courage, if you are one of the people who constantly say there is no longer an opportunity to make a success or build a big fortune today, let me quote a statistic that will give you confidence. Since the end of World War II, more people became millionaires than during any other 15-year period in history. How did these people make their millions? Because they took bold steps towards their goals. They dared think big and act boldly. Remember this psychological truth: fortune favors the bold. You must believe that this is the moment in which you will begin the achievement of greatness, recognition, fame, fortune, whatever it is that you have written down in your private blueprint of destiny. Every one of the 10,000 cases of successful men of history that I have studied shows that this was part of their $1 million secret to wealth and achievement. They caught the ebb tide of fame and fortune, and it was able to sweep them onto glorious achievement. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune, amid all the voyage of their life, is bound in shallows and in miseries. Shakespeare. When is your flood tide of fortune? Your flood tide of fortune need not wait for some favorable moment or some propitious circumstances. You can take time by the forelock and literally create your own circumstances. It takes bold thought and bold action to bend time and circumstances to your will. And yet, all great men have done just that. Force the time in which they lived to recognize them and their advanced discoveries. One of the most highly paid positions in the United States, next to that of the presidency, is that of superintendent of New York City's schools. It pays $35,000 a year and is one of the choicest political appointments of city politics. When that post came vacant in recent times, no one dared apply for it, thinking it was such an impossible thing to try for, as it had always been one of the local plums of Tammany Hall. However, an educator in Pittsburgh read of the vacancy and had the audacity to make application for this powerful position. Everyone was shocked at his nerve. But because no one else had the boldness to apply for the post, the big job went to this man, who was not even a New Yorker, and was perhaps no better qualified for the position than many New York educators. Why did this man win this lucrative post? Because he was bold in concept and bold in action. Executives tell me that in all big organizations, they have thousands of applications for the smaller paying jobs of $8,000 to $10,000 a year, but few for the higher paying jobs in the $15,000 to $20,000 a year class. People are afraid to try for the big positions of life, afraid to act and think with boldness. The boldness in all nature. Boldness and audacity exist in all nature. Look about you and see how wheat germinates in the ground to become a crop. What forces it has to fight? Drought, insects, weeds, birds. All these things oppose its growth, and yet it grows and survives because this pattern of bold action is within its kernels. There is nothing so audacious and bold as the birth of a baby. What formidable odds a newborn baby has to fight? Being born was one of the most difficult things you will ever have to achieve, and yet you did it, because you knew nothing about it. Some automatic brain took over and made it possible for you to be born. To fight life, to meet the challenges of life, takes the same type of bold and resolute action, with a complete disregard for the dangers inherent in life. Only when you have this bold concept of yourself and your future will you be able to meet the challenges of life and rise above them. Fortune favors the bold. When Pasteur set out to discover why the wines of France fermented, ruining their multi-million-dollar-a-year business, he worked against formidable odds. Up to that time, germs were completely unknown, and when Pasteur made his great discovery, people laughed at him and called him crazy. When his theories worked, people called him a genius. But the thing that really took boldness was when Pasteur perfected his rabies vaccine and was willing to risk it on human life. 20 Russians had been bitten by a mad wolf, and Pasteur sent word he could save them from death if they would rush to him in Paris. The Russians arrived, and Pasteur gave them his rabies treatment, saving the lives of most of them. This took bold and aggressive action, for the atmosphere of superstition and ignorance was prevalent at that time. When Harvey announced boldly that the blood circulated throughout the body, people called him insane. When Marconi told the world he could send messages without the aid of wires, it took boldness and courage to force the world to believe him. The Wright brothers had sheer audacity as their companion when they stepped into the cockpit at Kitty Hawk, that memorable day at the turn of the century, to prove that their heavier-than-air machine could fly. What bold action Ford took when he announced his first assembly line production, and how everyone in the automotive field laughed when he announced a design for a 5.8 motor. His engineers all told Ford it couldn't be done. He told them to come back when it was done. 6 months later, they cast the first motor that was in one solid block, and that was a 5.8. Millions through boldness and persistence. Walter Winchell was considered bold and brassy by some. Not only had he the audacity to call a spade in his news reporting, but he fought his enemies and the enemies of democracy with boldness. However, his greatest work was not only in the field of reporting. Consider what he did in the field of charity. Through the Damon Runyon Fund, which Winchell created in memory of his good friend, Winchell raised millions of dollars through boldness and persistence. Not 1 cent of this was kept by Winchell himself, all of it being turned over for research and work on cancer cure and prevention. The bold dream that won $1.5 million in diamonds. A young girl brought up in an average American family one day began to dream of having $1 million worth of diamonds. She never really knew where the dream began, but by the time she was 12 years of age, this dream was fixed in her mind, and she grew up with the idea that someday she would have her fabulous diamonds. She met and married a man who was wealthy. Although she didn't know how wealthy at the time, she fell in love with him. They went to buy an engagement ring at Tiffany's, and before they left the store, he had bought her $1.5 million worth of diamonds. This lady now raises money for charity. Her name is Nina Anderton, and she lives in fashionable Bel Air on the West Coast in one of the most beautiful homes and entertains lavishly. Her diamonds are famous, but what is more important, through her bold concepts and bold actions, she has raised millions for charity. When Conrad Hilton opened his Beverly Hilton Hotel, he gave Mrs. Anderton the opening night for a charity ball. That one night alone, she raised over $100,000 for charity. America was built by boldness. Think of what bold action was needed by the colonists in the early days when they declared their independence from England. The signers of the Declaration of Independence all faced hanging as traitors if their venture failed. It succeeded, but only because they had the boldness and audacity not to retreat in the face of formidable obstacles. What bold action it required of Abraham Lincoln to oppose the South and go to war rather than compromise with principle. The decisive moment faced by Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt and the commander of our European forces, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, was one that turned the tide of defeat into victory for the Allies. If they had not acted boldly in that moment of history, the Allies might have lost the war. He who hesitates is lost. When Napoleon stood ready to conquer England and win the entire continent of Europe, he lost his boldness for just a little while, and that fatal decision not to invade brought him defeat. A young inventor by the name of Robert Fulton approached the conqueror and offered him his new steam submarine, which could have sneaked into the English Channel and sunk all the British men-of-war ships. But Napoleon hesitated, and that moment of hesitation spelled his defeat. He who hesitates is lost. Never forget this lesson from history. You must not only have bold concepts, but you must take bold actions and strike while the iron is hot. No opportunity is too small to pass unnoticed. Every person is a prospective door to a fortune. Power in bold vision. A man and woman used to come to my lectures in Carnegie Hall. They heard me say that fortune favors the bold, and listened attentively to many of these principles that make up our $1,000,000 secret. He was a butler, and she was a maid in a wealthy man's home in a semi-rural part of New Jersey. Using the principles I teach of bold vision and audacious actions, they both began to visualize that this home belonged to them. They began to use it and enjoy it as if they already owned it. They stopped worrying about not being rich or having a home of their own. They lived as comfortably as their millionaire master. They had as much security as he had. I told them to begin to project the mental picture that this was their home, and to enjoy it and the millionaire's wealth as much as if it were actually theirs. They kept up this mental projection for a period of 5 years. Then I lost track of them. One day I picked up a copy of the New York Times and read one of those astounding Cinderella stories that hit the papers every so often. A New Jersey millionaire, a widower, had died. He had no one to leave his fortune to, so he left his fabulous home and estate and $500,000 to his butler and maid. I read the names, and sure enough, it was the couple who had attended my lectures so often. They had already mentally claimed their estate, and through some magic power of mind, they actually inherited that which they had kept in mind for years as being theirs. A young man's $1,000,000 bold dream. What if someone came up to you suddenly and announced that he was going to build a complete giant model of New York City, with the Empire State Building to tower 7.5 feet, and every window in the colossal city made of glass and cut out by hand? Wouldn't you think this a bold and impossible dream? Yet, this is exactly what young Guy Miller did after a lecture I gave in Carnegie Hall titled, Dream, Dare, and Do. This bright-faced, handsome young man had just gotten out of the Navy, and he happened to wander by Carnegie Hall and came in to see what my philosophy was all about. When Guy Miller told me his bold dream, he said, "I have faith in you after hearing you lecture. I believe you have the dream to see what I want to do." His idea was to build a giant model of New York City that would one day be in a permanent museum in which all the major skyscrapers and other buildings of New York would be faithfully reproduced. He showed me the Chrysler Building, which was the only building he had completed, and I became enthusiastic and offered to help him in making it possible to achieve his dream. 10 years Guy Miller has worked on his great project, and now completed, the giant model of New York City is 100 feet long by 25 feet wide. It was used as the opening attraction of the New York Coliseum, and Saks Fifth Avenue stores featured many of the buildings in their store windows. People laughed at this young man with his bold dream, but he disregarded them and their discouragement and worked doggedly at his project, until now completed. It has been acclaimed by artists and architects, as one of the great masterpieces in model building of our age. Mayor Wagner of New York City, upon viewing the model of New York City, remarked that he thought Guy Miller a genius, and the late Grover Whalen called it one of the artistic triumphs of the 20th century. Are you asking for enough from life? Perhaps you have not been asking for enough from life. You may have been selling yourself short. Actually, your gifts and talents may be worth much more than the price you are setting on yourself. There was once a famous singer in Italy named Caterina Gabriella. At the same time, Catherine of Russia was the empress of that vast empire. One day, Caterina Gabriella received a royal command from the empress to come to the court and do a concert. The singer sent word back by the courier that her fee for singing at the royal court was 5,000 ducats in gold, payable in advance. Catherine of Russia was indignant at such a demand. She sent word back, "My field marshal does not receive 5,000 gold ducats a year." The famous diva sent a message to the empress saying, "Then get your field marshal to sing for you at court." Needless to say, Caterina Gabriella got her 5,000 ducats in gold. Even such a bold queen as Catherine of Russia recognized and admired such audacity. The man who boldly asked for $75,000. During World War II, Lucky Strike cigarettes needed a design for a new package. They approached one of the leading companies that does industrial design and asked them to submit sketches from which they would select the best. The head of this firm submitted several sketches, and the head of Lucky Strike chose the one he liked best, a simple red and green circle with the slogan, "Lucky Strike has gone to war," for their advertising of their new package. When the head of the tobacco company asked how much he wanted for his design, he was told $75,000. The designer thought this was a very bold and high price to ask, but the head of the tobacco company paid it. Later he told the designer, "If you had asked us $100,000 for your design, we were prepared to go that high." This designer lost $25,000 because he did not think boldly enough. How many times in your own life have you lost out on some reward because you did not think boldly enough? Pointers for acquiring the bold thinking habit. 1. Make your decision boldly and stick with it. Make up your mind. The work you want to follow, the money you want to make, the house you want to live in, the friends you want in your life. Then, after making this decision, stick with it. Do not vacillate and change from day to day. This bold decision will shape all the events of your future life. 2. Avoid procrastination, for this weakens your resolve. Do not keep putting off doing the things you have chosen. Start today to take the active steps to study the course you want, to acquire more knowledge about business and finances, to prepare for the round-the-world trip, to make the social contacts you choose, to move into the house you desire, to buy the new car. You need not worry too much about where the money will come from to pay for these things. Commit yourself to a course of action, and you will discover the means to pay for it. 3. Bold actions with bold relatives. If your relatives discourage you and dim your enthusiasm or kill your dreams, you must take bold actions to restrain them. Either move away from them and their influence, or immunize your mind against their negative suggestions. 4. Refuse to believe in the impossible. The person who achieves the impossible is the one who refuses to believe in the impossible. Do not accept the limitations others place on you or your talents. I remember when Bing Crosby made his first screen test at Paramount. I met him on the set later, and he was worried. He said everyone told him he could never become a great singer or star because he had nodules on his vocal cords. Many people suggested he have them operated on, for it gave him a peculiar husky tone. I advised him to ignore all the advisors and to continue to have faith in himself. Some people advised him to train his voice and take singing lessons. Crosby ignored all these negative suggestions, given in good faith, and proceeded to work with what he had. That screen test sold for $250,000, and Crosby went on to make a fortune that is now reputed to be in excess of $25 million. 5. Act boldly in face of your seeming limitations. There may be limitations which you possess, which you may feel restrict and limit you and your ability to achieve success. You may feel your lack of education is a liability, and yet Shakespeare had no formal education. Neither did Dickens, and they did all right. You may have been born with what you consider too big a nose or mouth, and yet Martha Ray and Joey Brown turned these into assets. And certainly Jimmy Durante has made millions with his oversized nose. One often remember Marie Dressier at MGM when I used to have lunch with her at the commissary. Everyone told her at 50 she was a has-been, and laughed when she went to Hollywood on borrowed money to become a movie actress. She went on to make a fortune and was one of our most beloved actresses of all time. You may say, but the movie stars have it easier and can make a fortune more readily than others. But that's just the point. They do not have it easier. They have a more difficult time in a highly competitive field. It is actually easier for one who wants to become a business success to achieve it than for one to become a star. The same qualities, the same bold concept and bold action is required to be a success in your field, as it takes to succeed on the screen. 6. Have the courage of your convictions. No one else will have faith in you if you do not have faith in yourself. When you go for an interview for an important position, you carry with you a thought atmosphere of everything you have thought and really are. If you have thoughts of defeat and inferiority in your mind, they will be written in letters 3 feet high on your face and in the projection of your voice and your entire personality. Emerson said, "What you are speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say." Build your mind so that it will speak of success and happiness, poise and power. Believe in yourself. Have the courage of your convictions so that others will in turn reflect confidence in you and your ability. 7. Demand the best that life has to offer. Most people are always satisfied to accept second best from life, like a suit of hand-me-down clothing. When you ask for the leftovers of life, that's all you'll get. No one is interested in giving you more than you demand. Be sure you're worth more first. Then go on and demand from people and life the respect, support, and recognition you desire. A musical comedy called Oliver startled Broadway in recent times with its audacity and boldness. The originator of the idea was a young playwright who now has 2 plays acclaimed by the critics, which are successful: Blitz and Oliver. The story back of Oliver is an inspiring one, for it points up our concept of bold action, following bold thinking. This young writer had a friend in London who was a singer named Georgia Brown. He told her one day he wanted to do a musical for her. She told him to get some idea and work on it. He thought of Oliver Twist by Dickens, so he began to write the lyrics for the show. He did not know how to write music, so he just hummed his tunes. When he'd finished it, he took it to Georgia Brown, and she liked it. She helped him back it. They raised the rest of the money through another partner, and finally they produced the musical in London. It played there 2 years, and then came to Broadway, where it was a smash hit. The star, Georgia Brown, had always dreamed that one day she would have $1 million, own a Rolls-Royce, and have a mink coat. Well, today she has 2 Rolls-Royces, the mink coat, and her $1 million, either bold dream or concept, has to be in the mind first. Then comes the bold action that brings it out into reality and makes it a success. 8. Fight for what you believe in. If you really believe in your dream, fight for it. Do not give up without a struggle, and if you are forced to give up on one dream, get yourself another one as soon as possible. Remember the words of the song from South Pacific? You gotta have a dream, for if you haven't got a dream, how can a dream come true? 9. Build your sense of self-importance and value. None of us is born with a feeling of self-importance. It is something we must build. A sense of value only comes to you when you build your mind. This process of acculturation is what we call education. But actually, it is a lifetime process which must continue long after we have left school. Formal education only gives us the tools to use for learning how to live, But actual knowledge comes from the process of living. You build your sense of self-importance by studying constantly. Even if you have acquired the specialized knowledge necessary for your profession or business, you should continue to build your brain power and develop your brain cells. Some people study algebra or higher mathematics for this purpose. Others take up Latin or Greek or some other foreign language, not so much because these things will ever prove useful, but merely as mental exercise to develop all the facets of the mind, giving more power and acculturation to the entire personality. 10. Convert your wasted hours into gold. Bold actions are no good if you waste the precious stuff of life, time. Think of how many wasted hours there are in the average person's life. If they could convert this wasted time into knowledge, they could become successful in half the time. Make it a point to eliminate as much of this waste of the gold of life as possible. Each day set aside an hour or more for reading self-improvement or other worthwhile books. Too much time is wasted in looking at movies or TV programs that contribute absolutely nothing to the sum total of mental power or knowledge. Some of this type of entertainment is all right, but be careful how you spend your hours. They are more precious than gold.